Well, it's 12 noon, and we said we'd start at noon, so welcome all of you to the budget rollout. It's great to have so many of you join us today, and I think we're here to talk about the remarkable work that Senator Hill and the budget team has done in preparing this budget. What we have is a no new tax budget, and I think we've been very clear that we felt all along that $3 billion more revenue was certainly enough to do this. We have tax relief for families, we fully fund K-12 education, and we protect the most vulnerable, all without raising taxes. And I think it is bold for those points in K-12 and higher ed. We don't measure, for example, we don't measure the success in higher education by the amount of money that's spent on need grants. We measure success by reducing the need. So with that, I'll turn it over to our chairman, Andy Hill.
Thank you very much. All right, well, thanks for everybody for coming out today. I'm here to introduce not just a budget, but a comprehensive plan to prioritize education, live within our means, and protect our most vulnerable citizens. I'm joined today by a number of my colleagues, all who took a big role in developing this budget. It's a team effort, and a lot of work went into it. Each year, as the chair of Ways and Means, I'm tasked with creating a document that, in its simplest form, allocates dollars from the state for the next 2 years. And to many, that may seem fairly simple. You put some here, you take some there. You figure out how you're going to fund the state programs for the next 2 years. But for me, it's much more than that. It comes down to delivering the priorities of the people of the state of Washington, not just to the politicians here in Olympia. And finding a way to fulfill those priorities often requires us to think outside of the box to meet the expectations of Washington's residents. And this budget does just that. Over the next 2 years, we'll provide an additional $2.7 billion for K-12 education. This will make significant investments in our students, in our teachers, and in our school buildings. That funding would mean that K-12 education would be close to half of the entire state budget, which is a level that has not been seen in over 30 years. And interestingly enough, as past those 30 years, where new revenue going into the state went 2-to-1 against education. And when I talk about education, I mean early ed, K-12, higher ed. It is a spectrum. In the last 30 years, new revenue coming into the state went 2-to-1 against education. And that put us in the current position where we have the Supreme Court looking over lawmakers' shoulders to make sure that we're fulfilling our paramount duty. This budget prioritizes education, the new dollars coming into the state, at a rate of 3-to-1. Let me repeat that. For the last 30 years, it's been 1-to-2. This budget spends new money 3-to-1 for education. The other problem, worse than the failure of the priorities over the last 30 years, the budget's been artificially balanced over the past 10 years with dramatic increases in tuition for students and their families. It's really nothing more than a hidden tax on those that we depend most for our future. Our budget provides the first tuition cut since the 1970s. It may actually be longer than that. That's the farthest back we could go back in electronic. We're going to have someone dig out the microfiche and see how long it really was. But think about that. Since the 1970s, tuition has gone up. We are going to actually cut it. Students will see an average of 25% reduction in tuition at colleges and universities. We hear from college students and their parents about how expensive college is, how much debt they accumulate, and how hard it is to get financial support. A student that's paying almost $11,000 a year today at the University of Washington will pay $7,500 for that same tuition 2 years from now. Not only does that serve as a tax cut for low and middle class families, but it makes higher education more accessible for students who want to go and invest in their future, but find it too expensive. You know, with more and more of the jobs in our economy requiring additional education or training, it's absolutely critical that we make these investments in higher education. We also invest in quality and access for our littlest learners. We expand high-quality early learning, which means that students can enter kindergarten ready to learn. And the data is very clear. This is one of the best investments we can make. It's especially true for low-income students, where we see the greatest need to improve our high school graduation rate and close a persistent and unfortunately expanding opportunity gap in this state. We also face many challenges and opportunities to support our most vulnerable friends and neighbors, and we make significant investments in the well-being of people with mental illness and in the early and in the safety of our communities. We protect the VIP Act that was passed 2 years ago. This provides services to 5,000 individuals with developmental disabilities and their families. You know, it's interesting, it provides respite care, it also provides employment supports. And just yesterday, I received a note from a woman in my district, and I'll quote it. "Hi, Andy, I just want to thank you for speaking out in support of funding supported employment for people with disabilities. Without that, Nigel would never have the opportunity to work for Northwest Landscaping on the Redmond campus of Microsoft. He is loving it and has done so much for him to be a part of a team every day." And there was a picture of Nigel in his uniform. You know, I gotta tell you, having that type of impact is why what we do here is so important. And I'm just incredibly honored to be part of that. We make more meaningful investments to protect our senior citizens. We address elder abuse and neglect with significant increases in actual people investigating these cases. And we expand the senior citizen property tax exemption for the first time in 10 years, providing relief to 100,000 low-income seniors. And we do all of this by setting our priorities and living within our means. That means we did all of this without raising taxes. And when we sat down to write our budget, our main objective was not to spend a certain amount of money. And it wasn't to raise taxes no matter what. Our only goal was to provide the services that matter, what people expect and deserve from state government, without calling on families and businesses to send us more money. I've said it before, taxes should be the last resort and not the first response. And at a time when the state is collecting $37 billion over the next 2 years, that's $3 billion more than we had 2 years ago, $3 billion. Citizens expect us to govern with what we have. And you can see by this budget that we're not just scraping by. It's clear we can make significant positive investments without putting jobs or our economy at risk. You all saw the House of Representatives released its tax and spend plan last week. You now have the Senate solutions here today. The past 2 years, both chambers have come together. We've passed overwhelmingly bipartisan plans that prioritize education, that live within our means and protect our most vulnerable citizens. If both sides are willing to come together, we certainly are, and hold the priorities of our voters, we have a clear path forward, and we believe we can achieve a final bipartisan plan that delivers for the people of Washington on time. And with that, I'll take any questions, and I got a lot of friends up here that can help answer them.
Will the Supreme Court be satisfied with the Senate plan on the K-12 spending?
On the K-12 spending, yes, we drive $1.3 billion into all-day kindergarten, books and supplies, and K-3 class size reductions. So it meets all the requirements of 2776, which by statute has to be funded by 2018. It does all of that.
John? A couple of number questions. closing 12 tax exemptions, how much money would you be raising by that? And also your budget is $800 million less than the House budget. What are they spending money on that you're not spending money on?
I'm not sure I got your 12 tax exemptions. What do you mean by closing 12 tax
Okay,
exemptions?
how much money? Yeah, does it closing the 12 exemptions?
You mean
does
the
it-
exemptions that already expire this year?
No, your handout sheet says closing 12 tax
Got it.
exemptions. How many?
Actually, it's 15 tax exemptions expire. They get closed, it generates about $40 million. The other question is, we actually think it's about a $1.2 billion difference in spending between the House and the Senate state budget. And the high-level breakdown is about roughly half of that goes to additional compensation. For a lot of it goes to teachers. The bulk of it goes to teachers.
What's the other half?
The other half is they spend a little bit more in early learning. They do not take lean savings. And then an awful lot of additional policy ads. In other words, non-required things that people have asked for. They funded the bulk of them. We reprioritized. But these are additions that they made, and additions we chose not to make.
So are you doing the 732 COLAs for both years of the biennium, but then not doing any additional raises for teachers? And why did you take that approach?
Correct. So we're giving Initiative 732, which provides a COLA to teachers. It's been on the books. It's been suspended for 6 years. We fund that for both years in the biennium. The dollar amount on the 732 for teachers is about $200 million, and an additional $35 million goes into higher ed.
Are you optimistic that voters will ratify the change to I-751?
Yeah, the question was, am I optimistic that the voters will ratify a modified 1351, the class size reduction? I believe so. I believe that with the proper information and the fact that what we do is we fund the K-3 class size reductions, that is where scientific evidence shows you get the best return for your taxpayer dollars. I'm going to take another. John, you've had yours. I'll take another one. Here we go.
You're thinking presumably in November. What's the game plan?
The game plan is 1351 then becomes state law, and we will have to fund it, or we will have to amend it here with a 2/3 vote of the legislature.
Senator, can you give us some examples of some of the cuts we're looking through here and see some, but verbalize some for us. What are some areas where we're going to see cuts, savings that maybe the House didn't?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, our social safety net, we believe everybody who's receiving benefits today will continue to receive benefits. So if you look at our, traditionally the housing, Housing and Essential Needs program, our Age Blind and Disabled program, you usually see cuts on those. There are no cuts. What you may see in the budget is some reduced numbers. Our TANF, which is Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, those caseloads have dropped, which makes sense because our economy is improving. So as those drop, it frees up money, and we take that money, the extra money, and use it for education. Excuse me?
What are some examples of the tax breaks that are expiring?
I do not have the list in front of me. We can get that, staff can get that for you.
Run the risk of wiping out some of the gains you might make from the additions that you're making in mental health?
No, and in fact, what you see in mental health, you'll see some decreases in spending. Two areas. One area that we're actually surprised no one else, both the governor and the House didn't take a savings. We actually got a waiver from the federal government to use our IMDs, which are the large institutions. We can get more federal match for that. We're getting it already, so we recorded that in the budget. The other places where you'll see reductions is at our regional support networks. They're building up fairly sizable fund balances, which means that we're actually paying them too much, so readjust the rates more to actual. So it's more a reflection of what's actually the actual costs. So again, we don't expect to see reductions there in services offered.
The House is expected to pass its plan off the floor later this week. What's the time frame for the Senate, and what's the time frame you're looking at for us to see you guys
Well, the first question is the most important one. That's 105 days, April 26th. We will be moving this, we will be hearing the budget this afternoon. We hope to vote it off the floor of the Senate on Thursday as well. We want to get negotiating as soon as possible. And you get this little bit of sense of urgency from me, because when we release a budget, when we delay a budget, the people that suffer the most are our school districts and our students, because they have to start writing their budgets in May, and if they don't have one from us, they actually have to start sending out layoff notices. And especially in this scenario where we're driving so much more money into K-12, it has a huge impact on what they do, and they need to know that. So we really want to get finished on time to make sure that we have our school districts are able to gear up for these huge new investments.
Senator, you talked about cost of living raises for teachers. Beyond teachers, what about pay raises for other state employees?
So for other state employees, we take our compensation strategy differs a bit from the governor's. The governor chose to do pay raises across the board percentage increase. We really wanted to go after the problem of wage inequality, and we really wanted to make sure that we're paying our lower paid workers more. So they're the ones that are really interacting, they're the boots on the ground interacting with our citizens. And so our compensation policy for state employees is that we give every employee a $2,000 raise. So if you're making $40,000 a year, you get a 5% increase. If you're making $100,000 a year, you get a 2% increase. And again, when you talk about purchasing power, this is really going at helping out the people that need it the most.
How much is that in total dollars compared to what was negotiated?
It's about $75 million less than what was negotiated. Not a huge amount of money. Over 2 years, correct.
Senator, the premise of the Democratic budget seems to be the economy's growing, it's time to kind of ask for more revenue, make investments. Obviously, this budget doesn't agree with that. No new taxes, basically. Why is that so important to hold the line on taxes now that things are getting better?
Listen, we have a very fragile recovering economy. If you live in Seattle, that's not apparent because there's cranes all over the place. But if you go across the state, it is an uneven recovery. And we do not want to put our families and our businesses at risk with additional taxes when we believe we can fund our priorities with the money we have. And I think that's the important thing is it's not to raise taxes just to raise taxes. Do we really need it? Can we live within $3 billion of additional revenue? And we believe our budget does that. We believe it does a great job. We believe it looks out for the most vulnerable, and it really prioritizes education.
You feel like you have enough money?
I feel like we absolutely. Let's see.
You're adding slots for the ECAP program.
Right.
Is there any other place in government where you see more people receiving services than they do today, or are you just keeping it where it is?
Yeah, that's a great question because everyone likes to talk about who's not getting services. We're adding 4,000 new ECAP slots, which is our early learning slots. If you look at the number of people that are getting increased mental health services, I mean, it's probably the largest investment in mental health we've seen in decades or ever. It's $70+ million of opening up additional capacity. We also extend foster care for the 18 to 21-year-olds, and we also up our autism screenings for early age autism screenings. Yeah, and one thing that, this is why I have these guys here, is, one stark difference you're going to see between our budget and other budgets is in the state budget here, we actually have a capital budget that builds the classrooms needed to absorb the reduced class size. So our capital budget has funds for 2,200 additional classrooms across the state, which has been one of the big concerns of our school districts. No, they don't. Yeah, basically what happens is levy equalization is something we drive out to essentially property poor districts. And as we add more money into the education funding, the levy capacity goes up. And so we're driving $1.3 billion of additional money into K-3. what we're basically saying is, well, your levy capacity doesn't need to go up because we're driving so much money. So we keep your levy capacity the same way. So you get the same amount of money you got last year, we just don't increase it. This is a very small tweak. You talk about whether we need to do levy reform. We actually have a bipartisan, bicameral group that is working on a solution to that because of our over-reliance on local levies for basic education. Do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, so thank you. I would say that there has been a very strong group of legislators that have been meeting for a long period of time, focusing on what we all know is an unfair levy system, and it results in an unfair compensation system. That we want to get a quality teacher in each classroom, so there is a group of legislators looking for a comprehensive, holistic solution that addresses both the levy issue and compensation. So that's why you don't see a lot of compensation issues in our budget today. That's mostly will be wrapped up in those kind of discussions. Thank you.
What about there's a $200 million line item in the House budget for K-12 employee benefits, and I didn't see that in yours. Is that wrapped up in that discussion, or why aren't you funding that?
We just lined up with the governor's budget on that one.
Okay, I got a question just comparing yours and the Democrats' math. Okay, the Democrats, whether you agree or disagree with them, believe you need $1.5 billion more dollars in new taxes and revenue. And as near as I can tell, you're booking about $365 million in new revenue between exemptions and the marijuana thing. And when you throw it in with the, the $800,000, $800 million, the question is I don't think you get, how come you?
So let me just,
the
I'll
math
lay it out.
doesn't add up, or else the two sides are in different universes.
No, we both have nonpartisan staff that drew these up. This budget balances over 4 years. It meets the 4-year balanced budget requirement. That means all the additional money that needs to be to keep the K-3 and the full all-day K going. It accounts for ECAP expansion as it becomes an entitlement in 2019. The difference is they spend a lot more money and they have a lot more taxes. We prioritize exactly where we want to put the money because we think, really, with this fragile economy, it's not the time to take more money out of our citizens' pockets. How about right here? You got a question.
Put a comparable chunk of money into higher ed in the future to backfill cutting tuition so much?
Well, I think it depends on who's leading in the legislature, right? I think if you have the majority coalition caucus leading, we've been very clear that higher ed is a high priority, that we prioritize students over everything else, that we think, and now, if you have other leaders, they may have a different view. If you look what's happened over the last 10 years, they've doubled tuition. So I think it really depends on who's leading it, and I think we have a very good track record of where our priorities are. I think it would be terrible. I think it would be a poor decision to do something like that, absolutely.
Senator Hill, the Democrats spend a lot more money on what?
And someone asked this question, they spent about half $500 million more in compensation, most of that going to teachers. They spend more in early learning. They have some different policies there. We require the executive agency to show lien reductions, to actually show savings. And let me tell you, as a budget writer, there is plenty there to capture savings and efficiencies. The House budget does none of that.
How realistic is it to say that we can get out in whatever the countdown is when you look at your proposal versus the House's? A lot of ground.
You know, we have a good record of working together. I meet regularly with Representative Hunter coming up to budget season. I'm confident we can get there. We have to do it. We all want to get to the same place.